round 10 of the Tata Steel Masters, and the chaos continues. Another day full of extraordinary games. So I want to look at the game between Alexander Donchenko from Germany, 25 years old, and playing black, 17-year-old Domaraju Gukesh. Now, Gukesh is fighting for first place. Of course, there's a huge pile-up at the top, but I think Gukesh would be targeting Donchenko, thinking this is my chance to try and win, even though he's playing with black. And Donchenko plays an opening with plenty of imbalance. He allows the Nimzo Indian, so I'm sure that was welcome to Gukesh. The Rubinstein system with e3, and bishop d3, and d5, so solidly planting a pawn in the middle. And all the old lines start with knight f3 and then c5 and so on. But instead, Donchenko played in the trendy new way, basically, or relatively new. Taking on d5 and then pushing the bishop. It's possible to take here. That just leads the game into other paths. But here you can just drop the bishop back to d6, and it does look pretty good on this diagonal. So here is White's idea to play queen c2 and then knight e2. So this very solid setup. Rook e8, that's where the rook belongs in these systems on the semi-open file. And bishop d2. So you can see that White is setting up very flexibly. It could be that White will go kingside. It could be you go queenside. It might well be that you want to push through the middle with f3 and e4. So it's like a normal sort of Queen's Gambit exchange variation, except this bishop is on d2 rather than g5. But the important thing is that that bishop will protect the e-pawn if White wants to play for f3 and e4, or f3 and maybe advance these kingside pawns. But the king is flexible. It can go to the right or the left. Knight d7. And when I looked at the database, it's interesting. I couldn't see any games, previous games, by Donchenko in this line, but I did see quite a few games by his compatriot, Matthias Bluebaum. So I wonder whether perhaps they'd work together a little bit on this system. Who knows? f3. So, as I said, you can just castle there if you want to. But at the moment, there's no need to commit. So f3 takes away these squares. And I think Gukesh plays in the principled way. If White plays f3, then for me the principal move is to play c5. Because it means if White is going to exchange here, you can see that pawn is just a bit weaker on e3 once f3 has been played. So I think this is a good move. You know, the centre is a little bit more fluid, so why not put some pressure there? You might, in some circumstances, play c4 as well. Just depends. Okay, here's one particular circumstance where c4 is actually possible. I mean, normally you wouldn't want to take the pressure away from d4, but it could be useful. So, for example, if g4, then you can play c4, because that bishop has run out of squares and that exchange is certainly favourable to black. Anyway, let's go back. So you can just castle queenside here. That's been played before. In fact, Matthias Bluebaum, I mentioned previously, German Grandmaster, has played in that way before. But very quickly, instead, Donchenko played h4. So he's starting a kingside pawn storm. Now that's pretty daring when your king is still in the middle of the board. It feels more natural to play g4, but as I pointed out, that's not working. So the difference here is that if c4, then if g6, the bishop can just drop back to h3. And then c4 is strategically not very good because now there's no pressure on these points. Gukesh replied with knight b6. And I think that's a good move. You know, there's no need to react to this pawn storm at the moment. It's going to take a long time before these pawns actually land. In the meantime, you know, black might be able to stir up some trouble, maybe on the c file, maybe with knight c4. And now, after a 28-minute think, g4 from Donchenko. So he's really, really going for it here. If black takes, then you can just recapture with the pawn and castle queenside, and then, well, we're getting closer to something that's pretty dangerous now. Therefore, Gukesh, after a 15-minute think, threw the knight in on the outpost, and that is threatening to take here. So, you know, the tension is ramping up here. So Donchenko exchanged off that knight. And he now decided to close the centre, which is kind of understandable, you know, because the centre is now looking more fluid. So he played d5. In fact, castles is a better move. And this is just a really unclear position. You know, with these pawns still looking like they might advance down the board. But then again, you know, black has counterplay. Let's remove that knight. You know, maybe this knight comes here and into d3. You know, this is very, very tricky. But d5. So that's in some senses much more ambitious because it closes the center, keeps, you know, this space in the middle. But now rook b8. And this is pretty quick. So another big think from Donchenko. He played h5. I guess if g5, then the knight can just hop into h5 without any difficulty. h5 played. So he's looking to push on and then maybe just, you know, explode black's kingside. But g5, counterplay, and this is getting serious. I love the way the players are calmly ignoring each other and just carrying on regardless. g5, so pushing that knight. But that knight is about to spin round. And where is that king going? It actually starts to look really serious. So that's why f4 was played. So attempting to shut out black's pieces, taking away the e5 square. Bishop f8. Now that's a very cool move. So he's just making sure, in fact, that those dark squares are covered. Of course, after h6, he keeps everything closed. And now, and in fact, this pawn is actually really vulnerable. So, for example, if white removes the king, in fact, Donchenko played rook d1 here, but if, let's say, castles, knight b6, you can see it was worth bringing the bishop back. So now this pawn is attacked. Okay, let's push this one out of the way. Knight goes back and knight takes d5. This is the problem for white. There are some nasty pins here. Pawn takes knight, rook takes. And if, let's say, queen takes, knight f6. Now the queen can take the bishop here. That pawn is threatened. And behind these pawns is a massive hole. And that king is looking really exposed. So rook d1 played. So I think it's motivated by the fact that this bishop, you know, could be attacked at some point, but also looking to perhaps hold that d pawn. But knight b6, so this is threatened. And, you know, if e4, okay, again, we'll push the knight back. And bishop g4, this looks pretty awful for white, it has to be said. You know, there is so much pressure here on the e file and just behind those pawns. King f2 played. b4, knight e4. Oh, well, excuse me, not knight b1. If knight b1, then this looks absolutely terrible. No, knight e4. So this is white's big hope, that somehow that knight can land on f6. And that might glue white's position together. And, you know, perhaps it might be possible to attack black's king. But bishop f5 looks like a good move. So if knight f6 check, then that can just be taken. If pawn takes queen, then bishop takes queen. Whoops, I misfired. There we go. So bishop f5 played, knight g3. Defended the knight. Okay, now it's over to you. How should black play here? Black to play. You ever think... I'll have a drink. Well, there's a simple tactic. Gukesh took on e4 and played queen e7. And this pin is absolutely deadly. This is the problem. And if king f3, well, you could just go rook e8 here. But you can also take that one. Because actually there's no real hurry here. So here, and then queen b7. That is very painful and very pinful. Wow. Followed by rook e8. I mean, that is completely winning once black takes on e4. So there was nothing left for Donchenko but to give a check. Of course, that was taken. If pawn takes, again, bishop takes queen. So e4. So there are lots of pieces on, well, a couple of pieces on priest here anyway. So check. So black wants to take here. And a nice move from Gukesh. Queen takes pawn. I mean, it's a really attractive game, it has to be said. So lots of funny pins in this position. Pawn takes queen, bishop takes queen. Bishop takes pawn, and at this moment, Gukesh decides to go for a technical solution. He goes for an endgame, which gives him a very clear advantage. You could keep the queens on here. You could play queen c6. I think that looks pretty strong. But Gukesh just wanted to simplify and turn it into a purely technical task, which is exactly what he did. So nothing better for white. Has to go along with these exchanges. Pawn takes, bishop takes pawn. So they've arrived in an endgame where black has bishop, knight and pawn against a rook. So a very clear material advantage. In these endgames, what is absolutely key when you're playing with the minor pieces is, do they have support from pawns? Well, the knight certainly does, so that's stable. The bishop doesn't, but it's hard to hassle that bishop. It is actually pretty safe. And the other thing is, can the rooks break into black's position? Well, not really, no. They're repeated a couple of times. No harm in that. Gukesh was running a bit short of time. That brought him closer to the time control. This is move 35. And now it's time to make some progress. This king is the problem. It's boxed in. It needs to breathe. It needs room. So f5 check is the move. Now, normally you wouldn't want to invite the opposition king up the board. But here, actually, this will lead to checkmate. This didn't happen. But this is checkmate. Actually forced. So in other words, this pawn had to be taken. You don't really want to go back with the king. Pawn takes pawn, and then the king can escape. So Donchenko activates his king's rook, defends the pawn, and rook d8. Okay, so he's trying to make life as difficult as possible here. And rook a6, so that just keeps black tied up. There's a pin here. Black's rook has to keep guard of that one, and you've got to watch out for the h-pawn. So this still isn't easy to win, actually. You know, you would, as black, you would like it if somehow you could bring this bishop round to attack the pawn, but it's not easy to do that, or maybe they attack this pawn. But how do you do that? But watch what he did. This is really clever. So first of all, a check, and then king f7. Rook h8, attacks that one. King e6. Rook a8, attacks this one. Bishop d4. Now, here's the clever bit. So he gives up the a-pawn. And you've got to be careful here. This can still go very badly wrong. So for example, if you take this pawn, then in fact white can hold that position. But Gukesh found a brilliant solution. You know, it looks like things have gone wrong here. And somehow you've got to, you know, hold everything together. And it's really not simple. But this is a great solution. Knight c8. Whoa, what on earth is that? Encouraging the rook to take the pawn. Well, if rook takes pawn, knight e7. Traps the rook. It can't move to these squares because of the bishop and because of the knight. So it can't get out of the way. It can't, you know, you can't roll the pawn down the board. On the next turn, the bishop just takes the pawn with an easy win. Beautiful solution. So after knight c8, Donchenko played rook c7. Pushing the knight to d6 in order to defend that one. Now black just wants to take on b2. Rook takes pawn. And once again, knight f7. You have to keep the rook boxed in. And black simply threatens to take here. So there's nothing to be done. It's the only try, rook g7. So the rook wants to break free, but of course that gets taken. And this is just a little bit of technique. Still got to be careful. So the knight stops the pawn queening. King here, king d4. And happily black can take the g-pawn. But you've got to get it right. Still possible to mess up this position. You just have to keep control. So for example, b5, knight d5 is actually fine for black winning. Okay, let me just roll through to the end. King f3. Here's an important moment, because actually you can still draw this if you play knight c6. In fact, white will draw that position, incredibly. But king f5 keeps that one well and truly boxed in. And here's how the game finished. Knight takes f4. Here, Donchenko resigned. Why did he resign? Well, if b6, check. And the knight just gets back in time to stop the b-pawn, and then that one will roll through to the queening square. Wild stuff. You have to salute Donchenko's ambition. You know, this is an incredible position. Incredible try pushing these pawns. But Gukesh was up to the fight. Found, I think a very brave response. Counter-attacked really well. And then he was in command of the tactics round about here. Thought it through very well and perfectly, actually. Excellent game by Gukesh. And that was really significant. With 3 rounds to go, Gukesh is in the lead. Joint lead with Abdusatorov, who defeated Varmadam in an absolutely crazy game. So they're both on 6.5 out of 10. And just behind them, Anishgiri and Pragnananda on 6 out of 10. 3 rounds to go. It is so tight. And I wouldn't discount the players on 5.5. 4 players on 5.5. Vidit, Nepo, Wei, Firuz Jah. 3 rounds to go. Tomorrow, Thursday, is a rest day. They play round 11 on Friday. So we go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we'll have a winner at the end of Sunday. Thanks for watching.